Welcome to another Beyond the Game Alliance provider preview. I'm Coach Julie Hatfield-Still, president of Beyond the Game Alliance. As an organization, our mission is to educate, empower, and support athletes in the transition from sports to life beyond the game, whether that be career or even college with our high school students. This may look like a lot of different things, but an integral part of our mission is to provide student athletes in our alliance the awareness first, the access, and even the affordability when it comes to alternative and integrative forms of service and support, which is why I'm so honored to be joined today by one of our aligned providers, registered dietitian and certified sports dietitian, Kristy Stevenson. Kristy, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this program.
I am so excited to have you part of this program. For those of you who are watching and wondering what Kristy's role is going to be, she is playing a key role in providing our students with in the game and beyond the game nutrition, education, and insight. You're going to see her as a provider in our workshops throughout the year, and our students also have an opportunity to apply for more customized guidance with her. So, Kristy, let's dig into a little bit about you and your story. Would you mind sharing what has kind of brought you into this career as a registered dietitian and certified sport dietitian, and just fill me in on your backstory a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I went off to college to be a teacher, actually. I love teaching, right? So I have that passion for teaching. But I discovered along the way that I also had a huge passion for what is in our food. I was actually going and to a weightlifting gym, which back then in the late 80s was a little unheard of. There was these two little freshmen college students showing up to the gym, right, and lifting weights with all these big burly weightlifter guys. But it really got me into, I'm hearing about all the stuff that these guys are taking, et cetera. And I started really realizing, wow, what are we eating and how does that impact our body? And I'm working so hard at my own body. How does that impact what we're actually eating? And I'm a child of the 70s when ultra processed food was born. So I'm really looking at like, wow, food is not all created equal. So that really kind of got my interest into food and nutrition, which then took me to being a dietitian. But then fast forward, I become a mom of three kids who are getting involved in highly competitive sports. And I'm watching these athletes work so hard and train and have no idea what they're eating, right? I'm seeing these kids, they run to the snack bar and they're not paying attention to anything that they're eating. So I started out really coaching kids of my own kids' team, saying, hey guys, time out. If we want to win this game, I went to the coaches and I said, we want to win this game. We've got to look at what these kids are eating. If they're just sugaring up before the game, that's why they have no energy at the end of the game and we're losing. Our skill is there, but our energy level and our power isn't there. So I started out with talking to those kids, which then kind of led into getting into the middle school and the high school athletic departments, which then ultimately led me to my business, which is performance nutrition. That's the name of my business because I do think that nutrition impacts our performance in every aspect of life, but it really got me involved in the sports side of it, and which then led me to getting my certification as a sports dietitian.
Oh my gosh, Kristy, I love your story, not only because, you've practiced it, but you've also lived it. As you're in your athletic days all the way up through beyond the game, it has really become a focus. And I like to think food is fuel for our athletes, and we all know what we should be doing, right? And most of us understand it's important. We just don't know how to actually apply it in our lives, which is why I'm so excited to have you a part of our alliance, because you bring the concept to a space of application and how our student athletes can actually take it out in the world and apply it to themselves. And I know that's, there's so much alignment between what you do and what and our mission as an organization. What for you made it a good fit to join Beyond the Game Alliance?
So I fell in love with this concept because I've always been so interested in seeing. I really think sports is this what I call a microcosm of life, right? So it's like this little place where we can kind of really learn what real life is all about. The problem is that we forget to explain to athletes how it applies to life outside of sports, right? And so I see this all the time, and I love this idea of let's get involved with helping transition these athletes beyond just the sport. So things that I see is that, athletes who have, learned how to eat for their sport, they now don't know what to do with that after their sport. They think that all of a sudden, oh, my sport's over. I don't need to pay attention to what I'm eating. But yet you're still trying to perform in life, right? And so in any kind of performance, whether it is a sport or a job or, raising a family, to be successful, we need energy, we need focus, we need, strength and power. And that all comes from the foods that we choose. So I thought it was an awesome idea. I wanted to get involved because I wanted to help that process, not just with the athletes in the sport, which I'm excited to do and help with the athletes in the sport, but then help them see how does that transition after the sport and how do we eat then and how do we look at food for the rest of our lives. So that was what really got me excited about saying, yes, I want to be part of this program.
Yes, love that. Well, let's dig into some of the challenges our student athletes are facing in regards to nutrition. And you talked a little bit about some right there, but what are you seeing out there? Why is this important for students to pay attention to now?
So there's a lot of things that a couple of data points or some things to think about. So I statistic that I've just recently actually learned the numbers on, which is when we look at NFL football players, for example. So you have your football players that are learning how to be big and bulky and eat calories and have all of this fuel, and then they're done with the sport. Guess what? 2/3 of retired NFL players that I didn't do the data on college or high school, but 2/3 of NFL players are considered significantly obese and or moderately obese, excuse me, and the other third significantly obese. So that's a really big problem. But then we've got other sports that it's kind of the opposite. Their sport requires them to restrict calories, perhaps, right? So they've got to make weight, right? Maybe our wrestlers or any, I know that the some of the different competitive fighting things they have to make weight, right? So they're doing these extreme things to get to that weight. And then there's other sports that maybe it is a aesthetic sport, right? So like dancing or ice skating, figure skating, things like that, where now all of a sudden we have to look a certain way. And so we are making some bad decisions that are to make those weights that are compromising not only when you're in the sport, we see those sports at higher risks for stress fractures, but then I'm looking at that then as after the sport. Is this now leading into a lifelong disordered eating, right? So have we now started some patterns while in the sport and now we're out of the sport, but we continue with this disordered eating. And so I'm very interested in that and being involved in helping with those athletes that need that transition to regular life, healthy eating, regular, not having to fit into a certain costume for your competition, et cetera, that now we have to have a more healthy view of what our body is doing.
Mm. As you're talking through that, Kristy, I'm just picturing these seasons of life as an athlete, right? We quite literally go through different seasons. And when it comes to our nutrition, sometimes the intention is to maybe lose or gain or just maintain or optimize. And then the purpose and the intention changes beyond the gain, right? We still want to be high performers, which is exactly why nutrition, we talk about a concept called the Solid 6 Habits of High Performers in our 8-week course for Beyond the Game Alliance. And the reason why it's in the top 6 is because it's so important to be able to shift gears in our nutrition. So you talk about disordered eating, and I think that is something that is so prevalent amongst our athletes. And I know personally, when I was a collegiate athlete and even a high school athlete, in hindsight, looking back, I know I experienced disordered eating, but I didn't know any other way. I was just doing what I knew best with the information I had at the time. So I would love to just hear your experience around working with athletes who, maybe are uncertain about what they should be putting into their bodies or what it could look like for them and are experiencing a little bit of disordered eating. Like, what is it anyways?
Well, I think that it's important to distinguish between an eating disorder and disordered eating. They are very different, right? Eating disorders, that's a different category, and we need to separate those. Disordered eating is when we are viewing food maybe not as but what's the best way to put this? You are using food maybe in ways to get results, or you're thinking that foods might be bad, and it is we're getting bad information often. I've heard of, things like, trying to cut weight, all these extreme ways to do that. Those can get us disordered in then what we think we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. And then that rolls into regular life thinking, oh, I can't eat those things. They're bad. No, they're not bad. They're actually good. One of the biggest ones I hear all the time is people say, here, I can't eat fruit. There's too much sugar. Oh, good Lord. No, the fruit is wonderful, right? Good, healthy vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, et cetera. I could talk forever about the health benefits of fruit. But it's that we get into thinking we shouldn't be eating for so many hours, and because we had to make weight, we had to get that weigh in. So then we think that same thing in the regular life, and what we're only doing is setting ourselves up for our bodies to have a metabolic meltdown, and and we're exposing things like our bones and other lifelong health, our heart, et cetera, our brain function to this inappropriate eating. So we want to make sure we're getting people back to looking at what were maybe the things you were doing, maybe the misguided information that you were given. I see that so often, misguided information. Athletes who think that they just need protein, 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 and they're not getting the carbohydrates that they need to fuel themselves. And carbohydrates are what actually fuel us in performance. So we're depleting ourselves and we're breaking muscle down, et cetera. So I could really talk forever about all the potential issues with that, but that's what we want to kind of catch. We want to catch where, what were your eating patterns? Hopefully we can catch some people in the game too, and help clear up some things. I'm hoping that we have that opportunity as well, but then look at, really catch the athletes after the game and say, look at what were you doing? And is that really, a lifelong healthy pattern for you to be following? Most of the time is no. Maybe they had to eat super high calorie to maintain their weight, but now they need to bring that down. Or maybe they were too low a calorie to maintain, their weight. So now we got to make sure we bring them up, et cetera. So I think that is that perfect, is teaching people how to like undo some of the damage that was done and get people on a really good path to eating healthy and being able to perform in their life outside of sport.
Kristy, you've mentioned patterns a couple of times, that many times as athletes, we are highly conditioned in a lot of ways. And sometimes we can just come upon a pattern that we don't even know is causing us to maybe causing a lower level of performance, or causing fatigue, or even causing injury. I know you mentioned stress fractures as a part of maybe a nutritional imbalance for our athletes. What other things could our athletes be experiencing right now that could be an indicator that they need some support in their nutrition?
This is a great question, because I often will ask athletes. I had an athlete that I was working with. This is an example, but I see this all the time. But given a specific example of an athlete who was training for, he was doing a combine, getting ready for the tryouts for the NFL, right? And he was training, and he was sent to me because they said we need to increase his lateral jump. And I asked him right off the bat, well, first of all, what do you eat during the day? He starts his day with a bunch of eggs, thinking protein, protein. And then I said, in this 90-minute training that you're doing, how long can you get through it with full energy? And he's like, about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I said, what happens in that last 45 minutes, half hour of the training? We've run out of gas. He goes, just try not to get yelled at, right? And I'm like, that's not what you're doing this training for, right? You're doing this training because you want to get better, right? You don't just show up to practice and just try to get through practice. The practice is more important than the game sometimes, right? And you want to have full energy during those practices. I worked with a figure skater, and they were training for 3 hours a day. And she was eating something along the lines of like a yogurt for breakfast. And then maybe like, I think it was like a half of a turkey sandwich as a snack in between. I'm like, oh my gosh, 3 hours of training. How are you having the energy and the just the energy level to get through that? Not to mention, how can you get better? How can your jumps get higher if you don't have the power to do that, right? So I think that is the biggest thing that I think athletes need to ask themselves, is that when they're training or when they're in games, do they have full energy the entire time? If they don't, something's missing, right? I mean, I talk all the time to coaches about, you can train your athletes, but I guarantee you, when you're playing against a team that is equally matched to you in talent, the winning team is the one who's fueled the best. The winning team is the one who has the fuel at the end of that game, right? So we have to ask of ourselves, do we have the energy level? Or is our gas tank going on empty before the game is over? Is our gas tank on empty before the practice is over, or before the lifting is over, or the training session? Because if it is, you're losing out on that time and that opportunity.
Oh my gosh. And I just keep thinking, like, talent, skill, it doesn't matter if you are fatigued, if you're exhausted, if your muscles cannot be optimized and move. So it's so important. And I appreciate you sharing that. So what I really hear in that is, athletes out there, if they're experiencing kind of this fizzle out in the middle towards the end of practice, maybe they're showing up and they're just fatigued going into practice. Now, we have a lot of collegiate students, high school students, right? They've had a full day, Kristy, of school and activity beforehand. If we could just give them one tip right now about preparing themselves for maybe practice after school nutritionally, or whatever time their games are, usually after a full day of maybe cognitive learning, and maybe not a great night's sleep, what would you be sharing with them as maybe something they can apply today to start changing the game, in the game and beyond?
Two big things. The first one, eat breakfast, please eat breakfast. Okay. I see this in high school sports all the time. Kids don't eat breakfast. Athletes don't eat breakfast. And then lunch is questionable, right? So they don't have that fuel to get to starting that practice or that game. Eat breakfast, eat a breakfast, eat a lunch, eat an after school snack. If practice or game is right after school, which does happen sometimes, then see if you can fit in. A lot of high schools I know have lunch at like 10 a.m., which is crazy, right? Between 10 and 11 a.m. And then they're out of school at 3 and practice or game is at 3 o'clock. That is too big of a gap to go. So breakfast, lunch, and then some kind of snack, some kind of recap fuel before getting out there on the field. But a bigger one is hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. So it is estimated that 80% of athletes, 80%, that is massive, right? Are showing up to their practice or their game or their competition. I like to call it their event. Because again, I think practice is often more important than an actual game, right? Yes, we want the games, the wins and losses, but you're trying to win your position, right? During that practice time. And that's when you're getting better. That's when you're building your skills, et cetera. So you need to show up to every practice as if it's a game. So I like to call it your event. But 80% of athletes are showing up to their events dehydrated. Once you start in motion, understand, again, let me repeat this because this is how important it is. Once you start in motion, you can't catch up. Okay? You are going to be dehydrated through that whole event, which is going to reduce not only your performance ability, your aerobic ability, your anaerobic ability, which is your endurance and your strength, your cognitive ability. Your cognitive ability goes down when you're dehydrated. People who athletes who show up to their event already clinically dehydrated, which honestly, 80% of most Americans are dehydrated in a chronic state, but athletes are showing up there. You can't catch up. You can drink and you can drink and you can drink during the event, but you're not going to catch up. You're just drinking to maintain your current dehydrated status. All right. So you need to show up hydrated. Before you go out on that field or go to that event, use the restroom. If your urine isn't like about a pale yellow, like a lemonade color or lighter, you're dehydrated. If it's darker than just a pale yellow, you're dehydrated. It's the easiest, simplest test to see, right? You can see it every time you go to the bathroom and you can see your hydration status. Show up hydrated. It makes a world of difference in terms of your actual performance. 2% dehydration rate is going to, like I said, decline that anaerobic and aerobic and cognitive levels. 3% or more, this is when we see injury, right? Serious concussion, soft tissue injuries, large tissue injuries, et cetera, cardiac issues. Yes, just because you're young, you can have cardiac issues. So show up hydrated. They're two most important, but that hydration, yeah, is a big one.
I see it all the time, Kristy. And here's the thing. Not only do I see it in athletes, I see it in high performing entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. There is a level of activation and accountability that comes with simple action steps, such as sipping on water all day through, which is exactly why we have our activation and accountability pods with the Alliance, so that students can have what seems to be a simple goal of drink, 8 cups of water a day before practice. Mm-hmm. And they can actually be held accountable to that through our activation pods. Those small, and as you're talking, I'm just resonating so much, Kristy, with the fact that these athletes and adults, right, have access to water all the time, yet mm-hmm. we still fall short when it comes to hydrating our bodies, and how important it is just for injury prevention and high performance in the game and beyond the game.
Yeah.
So, Kristy, thank you so much for joining us today. Our mission is to truly support these athletes at a high level in their game and beyond their game. We take a preventative approach, right? This is a proactive approach. It's not reactive. So we know nutrition is important. We know fueling our bodies important. So if you're an athlete in the Alliance watching this, show up to our monthly workshops. Kristy will be joining us throughout the year at some of those workshops. It's a great place for you to get in the room and connect with her. And if you're watching and wondering how you can join the mission, maybe you're not a part of Beyond the Game Alliance, there are 3 ways that you can partner with us. 1, you can become an aligned partner. If you're a coach, a director, a president of a sports organization, an athletic director in a college or a high school, let's start that conversation on what it would be like for us to come in and service your student body with our Beyond the Game Alliance programs and plans. You can also become an aligned provider, just like Kristy is for us. If you have a skill set, if you're passionate about athletes and you really want to give back to this community, there may be a place here for you. And then lastly, you can become a corporate sponsor. So sponsorship is a big piece of what we do and what we ask for from our communities. It allows us to fund and give these students access and even affordability to people like Kristy, who clearly is such an asset for our athletes. You can learn more about all of this at beyondthegamealliance.org. Kristy, again, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your passion for our athletes. I'm so excited to continue to play this game with you and go all out. Thanks again for joining us today.